Small towns and rural areas all over the globe seem to be holding dark mysteries that you just don't find in the cities. For some reason, a murder in a small town is much more shocking than one in the city, because you are probably a lot more predisposed to that type of stuff, hearing about shootings and stabbings all the time. But when you're in a small town where everybody knows everybody, and you rarely ever hear about anything crazy, this is where things definitely get interesting. Welcome back to the swamp, my friends, and welcome if you're new. Today I'm going to be sharing some creepy and allegedly true rural horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. You can also submit it on Reddit via r/thedarkswamp. Be sure to punch that like button so it really feels it, subscribe if you're new, and get ready for these creepy and allegedly true rural horror stories. An Unexplained Incident in Greely by Frank W. In the sultry summer of 2002, I was a mere 11 years old, marked by youthful curiosity and boundless imagination. My family had embarked on a life-altering journey, forsaking the city's comforting embrace for the enigmatic allure of a minor, isolated hamlet known as Greely, nestled deep within northeast Pennsylvania's dense, foreboding woods. The whispers of Native American tribes still lingered in the rustling leaves and the distant echoes of forgotten rituals, adding an eerie layer to our new surroundings. Our time in Pennsylvania had extended over several months, and as August drew to a close, the imminent return to school cast a shadow over the carefree days of summer. On that particular night, I was nestled in my dimly lit room, the TV screen casting a flickering shadow across the wall. The clock's hands suggested that it was around 9 or 10 in the evening, and the world outside surrendered to inky darkness. As the eerie silence enveloped me, a sound shattered the tranquility. A faint but unmistakable tapping against my bedroom window. My heart, innocent and unaccustomed to fear, somersaulted within my chest. Uncertainty gripped me as I tiptoed towards the source of this sinister disturbance. Initially drawn to ward off the darkness, the blinds now beckoned me to be raised. With trembling hands, I gingerly lifted the blinds and gazed into the abyss. What met my gaze was beyond my realm of childish nightmares. Two piercing, malevolent orbs burned in with a sinister glow, their unnatural luminescence tearing through the shroud of night. I reeled back in sheer terror, slamming the blinds shut with frantic desperation that fueled my every motion, seeking refuge from the unearthly presence that had violated my sanctuary. I fled to the living room and huddled on the couch, my heart pounding in a frantic rhythm. The dread that descended upon me that fateful night was inescapable, and sleep was an elusive mirage. When the first light of dawn pierced the sky, I mustered the courage to confide in my mother, recounting the horrors that unfolded in the darkness. Her reassurances, though well-intentioned, fell flat. She dismissed the haunting experience as the antics of the neighbor's cat, attributing my terror to a child's vivid imagination. However, with unwavering certainty in that moment, I knew this was no ordinary feline prowler. The malevolent gaze I had encountered had been way too high up in the trees, far beyond the reach of any earthly cat. My young mind could not yet comprehend the sinister forces at play that night. Years would pass, and my understanding of the paranormal would deepen. In retrospect, I witnessed something truly evil that night manifest. What I believe it was a skinwalker, a shape-shifting harbinger of dread. It gnaws at the edges of my memories, a haunting specter that sends shivers down my spine anytime I think of it. Freaky Matrix Glitch by Vic A. Hey Swamp Dweller, thanks for checking out my story. I'll start this by saying that I have spent my entire life living in and around America's deep forest, deserts, and mountainous regions across several states. So I've seen my share of weird experiences, from strange sounds in the woods and lights in the desert. But this one's a bit different, and I can't seem to rationalize it. This isn't an overly scary story, but the circumstances are perplexing. Freaky glitch in the matrix, if you will. This started about 3 years ago, I do believe. My partner and I were on a road trip traveling back from a week in Colorado. We were somewhere in western Nebraska and needed to stop for gas. It was somewhere in the middle of the afternoon and a sunny, clear day on the road. We pulled off at an exit advertised for a gas station and had to drive about a quarter-mile down to a connecting road, where we then found our stop. It was a tiny, family-owned looking shop with 2 dated-looking pumps outside. I filled up while my partner was sitting in the car, and after I hung up the pump, I went inside to go pay and get snacks for the road. Now this is where things get weird. This gas station had no drink coolers inside, only racks of warm bottled water, chips, and various snacks. Only these snacks were all brands only sold in Ireland, Scotland, and England. There were no Lay's, Snickers, and beef jerky you would regularly see at a rural gas station in the heartland of America. This was kind of weird, but I guess it was maybe the gimmick of the gas station that maybe they just had imported snacks. I left it at that and tried to move on with a standard drive back home. But of course, that's not the end of this story. Later that year, I drove to Colorado with my dad for spring break. I usually go to Colorado once or twice a year, and I am very familiar with the journey. I know where everything is along the road, and take the same highway through Nebraska every single time to get there. On the way there, I told my dad about the story of my partner and my gas station experience. And as we got closer to where I needed to stop was, I found that there was no exit. No sign of a gas station where we stopped, nothing. The same thing happened on the route back a week later. There was nothing there. 4 different trips later, no sign of an exit, absolutely nothing. I've looked on Google Maps, along I-80, looking for all the exits anywhere near it, and I just can't find anything. It was a memorable stop because it looked like a small gray house rather than a big truck stop like every other stop on I-80. Where were we? And what gas did I put in my car? I don't know. All I know is that the snacks that were supposedly there were delicious, and I'm pretty sad that that stop doesn't live in real life, because, honestly, the snacks were great. Thanks for reading, Swamp Dweller. I know the story's not necessarily the most creepy, but it definitely was a head-scratcher. Rougarou Encounter by Gus. My name is Gus. I'm 17 and I live in a rural southern Louisiana town. It's nice here sometimes, even if there are a lot of mosquitoes, snakes, and gators. I've been bitten by plenty of mosquitoes in my time, and I know a few people who have been bitten by snakes and even by gators. I'll spare you the details, but this story is something other than the many bayou monsters we know about. This is a story about a rougarou, or what I think was a rougarou. So, in July this year, I took my girlfriend Jules on a little ride around. We didn't drive around town very much, just in the countryside. It was remarkable that night. We could see the full moon and millions of stars. I stopped the car beside this sort of bayou swamp area. The cypress trees and water all just looked beautiful. We sat on the car's hood, cuddling and enjoying the night for about half an hour until we heard something walking. We tried to find out where it was coming from. After a couple of minutes, it stopped. We figured it must be a deer, a raccoon, or something along those lines. Then I saw something moving around in the water, and we both agreed it kinda looked like a gator. We weren't about to take any chances, so we were just about to get back into the car and drive off when the so-called alligator raised its head out of the water and looked to be like a giant dog head. I didn't say anything about it at first to Jules, and I just kept quiet because I didn't want to freak her out. Until we got some time around dropping her off at her house, and she asked me, "Hey, did you see something weird over by the bayou earlier?" I answered, "Yeah, you saw that giant head of a dog in the water, right?" She nodded her head. She looked at me with her face like she was debating whether or not she or I were crazy. A few weeks later, we took a day trip to New Orleans. Walking on the street, we discussed what we saw that night. Some old guy overheard us and wanted to know if he could ask us a few questions. He first asked, "Did it look like a giant dog?" We nodded. His next question, "What color were its eyes?" We didn't remember, honestly. He said it makes sense because Rougarou has all different eye colors, and sometimes they change on a dime. And when you see a werewolf-looking monster in the bayou, the last thing you're looking is at its eyes. "Y'all are real lucky it wasn't hungry, or y'all'd be gone," he said, and walked off. "Thank you for sharing my story. I've been out to that bayou a couple of times. Maybe it was our imagination, but I haven't seen a thing since then." The Spectre That Whispered in My Ear by Anonymous. So, for a little bit of backstory, you can call me Jay and I am 19. This all happened on July 3rd, 2020. I live in a rural area on the East Coast. My house is surrounded by forest and a bit of swampy patch. Anyway, on to my story. My friend's mom invited me over for a small pre-4th of July fireworks show at their house. It was around 9:30, and I had just finished dinner, so my mom and I were both going over. I threw some flip-flops on and grabbed a drink and my flashlight and headed out the door. I unhooked the bike from the chain and pushed it down into the driveway. I turned it around and biked down the dark tree-covered back road towards his house. As I rode, holding my flashlight in one hand and steering with the other, I began hearing something, like somebody whispering in my ear. I looked over and didn't seem to see anything. I could not understand what this thing was trying to say, but as I got further down the road, I heard more of these whispers coming from my left, and then to my right. The whispers grew louder and louder. My mind starts to hurt from hearing all the whispers around me. Then, something stopped my heart right there. A scream from in the woods way off in the distance, like some woman getting murdered. It made me want to stop, but I couldn't, so I kept pedaling harder. But as I pedaled harder, I heard the screaming getting closer and closer as it started to follow me. Then I heard something else from behind me as well. It sounds like somebody running and laughing psychotically, like a murderer would. I pedaled even harder and faster. My legs started to cramp, but I didn't care. I wanted to get out of the trees and into an open area. I could not tell if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I felt like I was so much further away from the opening than it was before. So I just kept on pedaling as I saw a car go down the street. I was trying to get closer to it so I could get into the light. I kept going with the full intent of getting away from whatever was happening. As I neared the opening finally, I heard the whisper again in my ear. It felt like something breathing against my ear as it spoke a few words that I finally understood. "Protect your shadow." It spoke as I felt this icy cold breath brush my cheeks. I soon arrived there in probably about 9 minutes, which I could have been there a whole lot later if I hadn't been dealing with whatever that was. I pulled in, and we had a good time lighting off fireworks, big bangs, and sprayers, and all the fun things you could possibly do with a fireworks kit. But something happened while I was there. Something had happened between my friend and his little brother, where it ended up with his little brother on the ground crying and the big brother getting backhanded by his dad. As soon as the backhand hit, I heard the snap of a finger by my ear, and I turned around and there was nobody there. The voice whispered again, "The shadow is now ours. Thank you for the treasure." I froze in that split second and thought, what's happening right now? Like, what the heck? I turned around to see the little brother get up and sit in a chair and have an ice pack on his cheek. As the night went on, I heard a whipping and a slight breeze. Then I heard what sounded like a cracking off in the woods. I snapped my head to the right to look out into the open farm pasture. As the full moon lit up the ground a bit, I saw a shadow outline of something within the tree line. It started running towards me as I fell back into the chair behind me as I got closer to the fire we were sitting around. It got right in front of me as I sat and staring into this thing's red eyes. A feeling of dread and fear took over me. I did not know what to say. I did not want to ask them if they saw it too, because then they might think I was crazy. But here I was, staring at this thing straight in its eyes.
"We are not here to harm you. We are here to harvest the shadows."
It spoke in a whisper, right in my ear again. I stood up and walked towards the shadow, and as soon as I got to where it stood, it vanished into thin air. I jumped back and looked back around, trying to figure out where it went. I looked over to my right in the doorway, the barn. The shadow made the motion of, "Come here." I looked at them and told them I was going to go to the bathroom. So I walked to the barn and peeked inside of it. I heard the pig squeal a little as I felt a cold breeze blast into me. I looked down the walkway of the barn and heard something creak above me. I looked up and there was a shadow crouched on a beam above me, looking almost like a Spider-Man type creature. It had a weird posture. I nearly fell, trying to back out of there, freaking out. It jumped down in front of me, the impact making no noise at all. I stumbled back, falling on my ass. I back up and my back hits the barn door. It slowly walked towards me and crouches in front of me and holds out its hand. In its hand sat a dark version of my friend.
"His shadow. What are you doing with it?"
I had no idea if this thing could hear me. It made a small sighing noise as I saw something like a mouth form on this thing. Its yellow teeth and red eyes were absolutely terrifying me. It stares at me as it holds out the small version of my friend. It smiles and hands me the small figure, and I look at it. It gave a small chuckle and vanished again. I slowly begin to stand up as the light slowly starts to flicker on and off in the barn. I start looking around, scared out of my mind. I hear laughter all around me, and then something goes by flying. I run to the door and try to open it. The door would not open though, as I turned and looked as the light shut off, and then it began to flicker like a strobe light would. As I looked down to the big barn doors in front of the tractor, sitting on the tractor was that shadow person. It stood up and jumped down from the tractor, walking towards me. With every flicker, it got closer and closer to me. It got right up into my face and blew a huge breath of cold, freezing air into my face as I grabbed the doorknob and opened it as I ran through the door, slamming it. I was terrified of what had happened. I had heard a giant bang above me as a firework went off. I slowly walked back to the fire. My heart was beating like a bass drum, and my face was paler than an albino. I sat down in my chair and watched the fireworks go off, hearing them explode. And as they explode, they light up the field a little bit, and I keep thinking I see that shadow out of the corner of my eye. As we winded down for the night, sometime around midnight, we went in and got a ride from my friend's dad in his truck. As we rode back to my place, I got a headache that was pounding in my head constantly. I looked over. Sitting across from me was the shadow. It gave me the motion to shush, and I did. I just rode in the truck until we got back, and I got out and unloaded my bike from the bed of the truck and locked it back up on the porch. I went into the house and told my parents about all the fireworks, and they were happy to hear it. I did not say a word about anything else that I encountered, because I did not want to end up in a psych ward. So I just went upstairs and laid down. As I laid in bed, the shadow sat at the edge of my bed and looked at me.
"Keep hold of your friend's shadow, or else you'll pay the consequences."
And with that, it snapped its fingers and disappeared. And with that, I haven't seen it till this day. I still to this day have no idea what it was. I don't know if it was a demon or a poltergeist, but whatever it was could have killed me or taken my body over or whatever. But it seemed like it was playing games with me. I still have that shadowy statue in my room, put away somewhere. I know if I'll need it, I'll be able to find it again. I still want to know what it was, but I doubt I want to know. This thing terrified me more than whatever I had to deal with months ago. The unknown is truly unknown, and is something we might never understand. My Town is Cursed by Anonymous. First off, I would like to start by saying that I am not a professional writer by any means, but have always been attracted by everything paranormal. I was not always the bravest person as a kid, but I liked it all even still. I have experienced many things throughout my life, some things that seem like they are from a movie or a book. This time I'll be telling you of a more mild and a little less strange thing that happened to me while walking home one night. Before I start, I will give you a little bit of background, so you better understand my story. I was born and raised in a small town in Mexico. Everyone knew everyone, and even though we had cars, we had all mostly walked everywhere. There was crime, but it was exceedingly rare, and nothing violent really ever happened. I am the youngest of 5, and my parents were rarely ever home. This meant I was able to stay up late and go pretty much anywhere I wanted. My hometown is in sort of a valley, with most of the town on one side of the tallest hills. My house was on a block right on the foothills of the steepest hill of my street, directly perpendicular to the 2 main streets leading up to it. One of these streets was essentially a main road. It was used to go up to a hill which was used for religious traditions. Anyway, this main road was mostly populated by family, with my grandmother on my mom's side of the family living near the middle of the hill. Her house itself was small, but the plot was big and had my aunt's houses scattered around it. This was still quite a long walk from my street, probably 5 minutes of walking. My family was a very typical Mexican family, and would gather at her house pretty much every single night. On one night, I ended up staying way past my usual time with a few cousins. By the time I started heading home, it was well past midnight. There were street lights, but they were very spaced out along the street, which was blocked off by a bunch of trees, making my area very dark. It was creepy, especially for a kid, but the moon was out and it helped ease my nerves just a bit. I began walking downhill toward my house. The entire time, I just kept feeling weird, like I was being followed. I did not necessarily feel like I was in danger, I guess, but I felt very uneasy. The entire walk, my heart felt like it was going to jump into my throat. I kept walking down the street, having to look back and around every so often. Eventually, I reached the corner, turned toward my house, and now I was on my street. There has been a house that has been abandoned for an exceptionally long time. It has always given me the creeps, and it was the 3rd house from the corner. I was just about to walk by it. Every time I walked by, I would always walk on the opposite side of the street, which did not even have a sidewalk. I would have walked through that same path that night, but this time it was blocked off by these huge piles of sand and dirt, probably some kind of construction work nearby. That, combined with a huge delivery truck parked on the curb belonging to my neighbors, forced me to walk in the middle of the street. As I approached the house, I had to mentally prepare and give myself the courage to walk in front of it. My heart began racing. I was always scared of the house, but for some reason, that night just seemed so much worse somehow. I forced myself to keep walking, and as I did, I heard someone call me from the direction of the house. I froze, my heart in my mouth, and turned to look, but I did not see anyone or anything. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I began breathing again, and I had been apparently holding my breath. I was about to start walking again when I heard the voice again this time. I turned to look at a boy. He looked to be about my age at the time, maybe a little bit younger. It struck me as odd more than anything to see a kid my age standing right next to me. I did not even think twice about the fact that I could see him perfectly even though he was standing in the dark. No lights coming from an abandoned house, and even a tree blocking the moon and streetlight. He kept standing there unmoving for a few more moments, not saying a word, just kind of staring at me. The whole time I was trying to process what was going on. He spoke again, asking me to go with him, saying we would play together. I kept trying to speak, but could not seem to form words. It felt like hours went by. The whole time I was frozen in place, just staring at this kid, my racing mind, and now realized he seemed to be glowing. I began to tremble the entire time. I kept trying to move, to scream, but I just couldn't. I couldn't even move to run. I wanted to get away desperately. That kid stood there staring back at me, not moving, not blinking. He spoke one more time before walking a few steps closer to me. He seemed to pass like a shadow or something as he walked. His figure turned dark and then became bright again. As this happened, he called my name, my full name, and then I realized he looked like me somehow. This shook to my core. I jerked back at the sight of this. It was me, but the eyes were all wrong. They looked like they were full of hatred. I regained control of myself. I screamed no at whatever this thing was and ran faster than I ever have before in my entire life. I still have no idea what that thing was. It didn't seem to follow me, and I never saw it again after that. It still scares me to think back to that day. People ask all the time here to try to figure out what it is that they saw, but I honestly kind of don't want to know. Anyway, if you do decide to read this on your channel, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true rural and small town horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to elbow that like button in the nose so it really feels it. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you're new to the swamp, as it helps us grow. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep us going on a daily basis. If you're on the go, but still want to listen to your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories, no matter whether you're climbing Mount Everest or somewhere deep in the woods with no cell phone signal, you can download them absolutely free from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and literally everywhere else you find podcasts online. I'd love to know in the comments down below what story was your favorite. It helps me pick out better stories in the future based on your interest. As always, if you have a story, be sure to submit them at swampdweller.net. As I say a million times in the video, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing it, just send in the story, okay? I don't want to have to pull out a gun, alright? Anyways, thank you guys for supporting the swamp the way you do. Don't forget to slap that like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. Join me over on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the gnarly things like that. And I'll see you all soon with another creepy episode.